South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson joined the president at that meeting. He joins us live to discuss. Alan, thanks so much for coming on. And during that meeting, the president went on to say that the government is eyeing concrete legal steps against social media. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. We went to the White House. I was there with probably about roughly 10 of my colleagues from around the country, as well as Senator Josh Hawley and Attorney General William Barr. We were there discussing steps forward. As you know, the president issued an executive order several months ago addressing this matter, and many of the state AGs have been looking at this as many of our constituents have reached out to us to say that they are being treated differently on the platforms that they're using, like you could say like Twitter or Facebook or some of these other major tech platforms, which are very different from publishers. These are platforms where people go to exercise their First Amendment rights to free speech. And what we're learning anecdotally, and what some would argue statistically, is that some of these tech platforms are treating different groups of people disparately based on their ideological leanings. Now, whether that's due to the tech platform's personal biases or whether that's due to some algorithm they would claim was the algorithm, we're here to say today that when people enter the public forum, whether it's owned by a private company like Facebook or Twitter or others, or whether you're out on the street corner in a public forum, all speech should be treated equally. And that is the concern that many of the AGs are sharing.
There's such a distinction between, as you say, a public forum and a publisher as well, which is what happens when we see these social media companies step in and edit people's comments or limit them as well. And in fact, these threats, they aren't really new. For years, the president has charged Facebook, Google, Twitter, and other sites for censoring conservative voices. Why do you think it is that the media companies are increasingly taking more active, aggressive steps to limit even the president's own tweets?
Well, I mean, it's like this. There's a culture war going on. You know, culture is upstream from politics. And so you look at big tech, you look at Hollywood, you look at academia. I mean, you look at the corporate world, you just start to see that leftward migration of bending to the pressures of many on the far left, which, listen, they have a right in a free economy and to exercise their First Amendment right to free speech. We support that. But here's the thing. Think of when the First Amendment was written. Back in 200 years ago, the public square was just a square piece of land in the middle of a town where people would go stand out there on cobblestone streets and exercise their First Amendment rights to free speech. Now the public square is not just a square piece of property in the middle of a village. It is now in a virtual world, and imagine a private company owning that square. And now you have people on the left, people on the right going into the public square, and they are treating people with a left opinion very differently than they are treating people with a right-thinking opinion. And they're hiding behind what's called Section 230 of the CDA, the Communications Decency Act. They're hiding behind that to prevent themselves from having any liability for the disparate treatment between conservatives and liberal thinkers. And we just don't think that's right. And we're going to look into that, and we're going to move forward.
I'm sure you've heard the argument from those on the left that would be quick to point out some of the posts that are shared on Facebook are actually from more conservative, right-leaning outlets. Some of the networks, rather, some of the most popular posts that are shared bring in the highest views. So I'm wondering how these posts and who can see them and how much access they get to be shared across social media platforms could even impact this presidential election that's coming up in less than 40 days.
Absolutely. And listen, the free flow of information is so vitally important so that Americans can hear what people of all stripes from all walks of life with all various viewpoints have to say. And when you're trying to stifle these one side from the argument because you control the platform, then you're kind of migrating over into a publisher. People who publish information are held to a different standard than people who are managing a platform. If you're managing a platform, then you should not be stifling and applying your terms of use policies any differently than if a person on the far left was talking. Going into this election season, we need to make sure that everybody from the far left to the far right can exercise their First Amendment rights to free speech fairly and equally, and we need to remove those legal barriers that prevent big tech from being held accountable when they put their fingers on the scales.
Do you believe that enough action is being taken by those in the Senate and those in Congress to actually make sure that that happens?
I believe that the attention is now being paid to this issue with the level that it deserves. I sat next to Senator Josh Hawley, who's got a bill in the U.S. Senate, and I've talked to other members of Congress who are putting forth similar measures. I want to read the bills. I've read about the bills. I understand what they're seeking to do. I want to make sure that we measure twice and cut once when it comes to passing something. I don't want to do anything to stifle free speech by removing protections from companies when they are simply acting as a neutral platform. What I do want to do is support legislation that treats that where the platforms start treating people with conservative viewpoints less than people with liberal viewpoints. We want a fair and balanced coverage for all viewpoints.
Speaking of fair, let's switch gears and talk about this upcoming election and what is being done specifically in the great state of South Carolina to ensure that even mail-in ballots are going to be counted fairly as well. Do you have any concerns about whether or not your state is prepared to deal with perhaps an increase in mail-in ballots this election cycle?
Well, first off, the State General Assembly about 2 weeks ago passed a law. The governor signed it in, I think, a week and a half ago, that allows people to vote absentee 30 days out. Before this law was passed, there were, I think, 17 exceptions where you could check a box and say, because I'm going to be out of town or because of this disability, I can't go to the polling place on Election Day. Now we have removed the cap of 17. Anybody for any reason can vote 30 days out for any reason whatsoever. And the General Assembly passed that. It's been signed into law for this election. The Court of Appeals in the Fourth Circuit just overturned a district court decision that basically removed the requirement for a witness signature on a mail-in ballot, which I think is incredibly important to prevent voter fraud. And here's the thing. One of the problems I'm having is that we're out there trying to balance access to the ballot box for all people, regardless of their political affiliation, but also fight against the ability for people to commit fraud. And every time you stand up and say we need election integrity, we're accused of fighting against people's access to the ballot box. That's not true. The General Assembly, which is majority Republican, has gone above and beyond doing what it can to give everyone fair and equal access to the ballot box by extending the absentee ballot provisions in South Carolina. And I think we're going to have a huge turnout on November the 3rd.
And you're doing that for everyone in the state, regardless of political affiliation, of course, as always. Alan Wilson, the Attorney General of South Carolina, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.